But then under Elizabeth, you start to see a rise in people going to spa towns to take the waters. Mary Queen of Scots was often being given permission to go, and Elizabeth's favorite, Robert Dudley, died while en route to baths at Buxton. So I got curious about this change because I started, to notice in letters people talking about going to the baths later on. And I wondered how that change started to happen. So how do we go from this culture where Henry VIII shuts down all bathing and bath houses and everything to a place where the nobility and even Mary Queen of Scots is going off to take the waters and enjoy a bath? So that's what this episode is going to be about. Also, on a personal note, I'm a total bather, and one of my favorite things in the world is hunting for hidden hot springs in Iceland. I could totally live in Iceland, if only because of all the bathing in naturally hot water that they do there. So bonus points to you if you're currently listening to this episode in a spring or a hot tub or a bath. Many of you are familiar with the town of Bath in Somerset, a beautiful spot, especially at this time of year, with rolling hills and a glorious cathedral and lots of Jane Austen history, and a bridge across the water that still has shops on it the same way London Bridge would have had several centuries ago. But of course, the thing that makes Bath so special, and in fact its entire reason for existence, are the natural hot springs. I also want to add that over 20 years ago, when I first moved to London straight out of university, I got a young person's rail card, which gives you a reduced rate on the trains. For anyone under 26, I think it was. Maybe they still exist. Anyway, I kept a map of England in my room, and each weekend I would close my eyes and randomly point to a place wherever my finger landed was where I would try to get to that weekend, which led to some amazing adventures in very random places I never would have gone to otherwise, like Whitby or Macclesfield. But the point is, the very first place that my finger landed on back in June of 2000 was Bath. And I knew absolutely nothing about it then, not even the Jane Austen connection. But I quickly fell in love with it and have been back loads since. So extra bonus points to you right now if you're listening to this in Bath. But personal share over, back to baths in Bath. In 1562, Dr. William Turner wrote a book called The Book of Natures and the Properties of the Baths of England. And this changed everything. In it, Dr. Turner lists over 60 disorders which could benefit from bathing, including, but not limited to, miscarriage, piles, migraine, sciatica, worms in the belly, forgetfulness, dullness of smelling, palsy, cramp in the neck, and the failure of menstruation. For us, with all of our snazzy modern medical knowledge of things like germs, these conditions don't seem at all related. How is miscarriage and, palsy related? But remember that pre-modern physicians followed Galen, and they believed that diseases were caused by an imbalance of the four humors: phlegm, blood, yellow bile, and black bile. Most of the diseases in Turner's list were due to an excess of phlegm, which was the cold and moist humor. And the cure for that, of course, was to heat and dry the patient's body using hot mineralized water. Early modern people knew that our skin would absorb anything put on it, the same way we know not to use lead makeup on our skin today. And they thought that bathing in minerals was the fastest way to get the benefits. But you could also drink the water and get the same benefits, just not as quickly. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the word bath as immersing the body or any part of it in water or other liquid for the sake of some effect, health, warmth, cleaning, promoted by the action of the liquid. During the Elizabethan period, we start to see more references to bathing and the restorative effects of a bath. For example, in Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, at the end of Book 1, during the battle against a dragon, the hero knight Redcross falls into water, and it's the power of that water that gives him victory. He was thrown into the well of life, which is described thus: For unto life the dead it could restore, and guilt of sinful crimes clean wash away. Those that with sickness were infected sore, it could recure an aged long decay. Renew as one were born that very day. The water also gives Redcross the mental fortitude to take on the dragon. So there's psychological effect as well as physical effects. Later on, Lady Mary Wroth, she was an English writer at the beginning of the 17th century, And in her book, The Countess of Montgomery's Urania, characters dive into the frigid sea water and immerse themselves in baths underground and drink from healing springs. The idea of the healing waters was becoming popular not just from Dr. Turner, but also later on there was a Dr. Walter Bailey who published a treatise in 1587 on the healing properties of the waters in Warwickshire's Newnham Regis. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes as well, talking about their composition and saying that they should be enjoyed in the summer. One change that was happening in the mid-16th century was the view of doctors was shifting from being purely religious. A religious doctor of divinity was, of course, the earliest form of doctor, to being scientific. And of course, this change would take a century or more to fully develop. We don't see it really being developed until later in the Enlightenment and after the scientific revolution. But we start to see the beginnings of it in the mid-16th century. People like Dr. John Jones was a physician, and he published A Dial for All Agues in 1566, attacking medical ignorance and emphasizing the need for knowledge from physicians, not just clergy. So Elizabethan doctors were looking for new subjects and potential cures, including healing waters. Within just a few generations, the most common thing to do when you were dying or when you were ill was to call a doctor rather than a clergyman. So we start to see this shift to physicians instead of just the clergy when we're sick. And of course, those physicians are out there hunting and starting to find cures for sicknesses as well. Elizabeth herself encouraged people to take the waters, but only if there was no hint of religious idolatry. For example, that no miracles were said to have taken place there. Dr. William Turner, who I talked about before, is this example of the new Protestant doctor. He studied at Cambridge in the 1540s. He studied medicine in Italy and Germany, and he returned to England to become the chief doctor to Edward VI's uncle, Protector Somerset. That connection is what led him to Bath in the first place. Somerset had acquired estates in Bath and Wells, but under Mary I, Turner had to go back to the continent, but he was restored as the Dean in Wells under Elizabeth in 1559. He had studied hot springs throughout Europe and wrote his treatise on Bath, and specifically had rules and ideas about how to make the baths even more efficient and better. As part of his improvements, he believed that there should be general rules to be observed of all of them that will enter into any bath or drink the water of any bath. No man should enter any bath before his body be purged. For if a man should enter into any bath before his body be purged, he may fortune never to come home again. Or if he does come home, he cometh home most commonly with a worse disease than he brought to the bath with him.